Hello,
Hey, good
everybody.
afternoon, everybody. Oh,
Go ahead,
sorry.
Jason. Sorry.
I was just going to say good afternoon, everybody. Deb, go ahead.
We're going to go ahead and get started. We're working on securing state ID today and the state ID fee. And I just want to let people know, because I have seen some questions come through in recent weeks. Some people think of this only as a fee waiver program, but long before it was a fee waiver program, it allowed us to substitute some documents and expedite the process for our folks who, because they are homeless, are not able to establish residency in the traditional ways that we know it. So I think that's really important to note, because the fee waiver is an added bonus, but there are other reasons to use this tool. So with that being said, I'm Deborah Hendren, and I work at Community Housing Network, and I'm a member of the ID Task Force, along with Elizabeth Kelly and Jason Weller and Jill. Jason and Jill are also here today. Okay, let's go ahead and start the presentation.
So real quick, Deb, just a couple of housekeeping things for folks who aren't familiar with GoToWebinar, the GoToWebinar platform. Everybody's mics are on mute, so we're going to cover a lot of territory today. So if you have questions for Deb or Jill, please type those into the questions toolbar. It's on the right-hand side of the screen. It's got a little icon next to it. Just click on it. It'll pop open. Type your question in. Hit send. I'll be monitoring those throughout the presentation. The other thing I'll point out is everybody wants handouts. As it turns out, there are, I believe, 11 handouts right now related to the ID process that Deb and Jill are going to walk you through. We're limited to 5 handouts for GoToWebinar. So we have a handful of the handouts available. One of those is today's presentation. Later this afternoon, I'll send an email out with everything else. So you will get that in your inbox later this afternoon. But I just wanted to point out to folks that they have some things available to them and other things will be arriving later today. Okay, thanks, Deb.
Okay, so let's go to next slide. Oh, we did housekeeping logistics ahead of schedule. Okay.
There we go.
Oh, so that's important to note too. We have a subscription available to listserv. We promise we won't bother you unless there's a significant update. Like for instance, the SOS 428 form that we're going to go over today was recently updated, and when we have those revisions, we like to send it through there. So if you get an invitation to join a Google group, please consider joining, because that will really be helpful to disseminate the information at a later date. We also keep the website up and running too with all the options. You also are considered a trainer for your organization today. So please don't feel that every single person in your agency, we know are very busy, have to come to this. But if you have the packet, anytime that we have an update, we'd like for you to go over it with people at your organization and your team and make sure to get it out to them. And I think that's all important. We will update the participant list to include the people that attended today rather than necessarily all the people RSVP'd. So we'll make sure you guys get the document today. Okay, Jason, next slide. Okay, so today we're going to talk about how to access the fee waiver process for applicants that are homeless. It's a mainstream process now available at any local branch office. That is significant. This used to be a pilot program with 5 counties having one location at each one that they could utilize to use this process. And now we don't have to do that. You can walk into the office. And when do you need to use a state ID exception process? And that's for a partial social security number only. Everything else, you can really go have your person go straight to the branch office, and we will talk about that today. Okay, so that's our attempt at humor, because we know that this is a lot of work and a live collection of documentation. It seems like everything in our industry is that way. So we are acknowledging that this is a little bit extra work. I promise it's not that many pieces of paper, but this will really help your program participant to move quicker. Okay, so what is needed to apply for a fee waiver? These are the basic requirements. And some of these also apply to the fact that we are able to demonstrate residency in different ways. So these are the bare bones of what you must have. People ask questions all the time about what do I need? These are the things. Okay, so the person has to be Category 1 homeless. And just in case people aren't aware of that, because we have people coming from a broad section of our audience, Category 1 is literally homeless. That means that the person is homeless according to the first definition established by HUD, which means they're either in a shelter, in a place that's not for human habitation, or they are on the street homeless. So it's not someone necessarily couch surfing, staying with relatives. These are folks that are within the system that we're working with on rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing and PATH programs. Certified birth certificate or passport, this is non-negotiable. A lot of times people call up and say, well, I don't have a birth certificate. What's my next step? You have to have a birth certificate. I know that the fees for birth certificates have often been part of the challenge for folks. We will be rolling out new agendas and trainings that there's going to be a similar process to get a birth certificate in Lansing or at your local clerk's office too, with some ability to reimbursement using the same kind of process. So more to come on that. HMIS ID card. If you are not an agency that does HMIS, there are people in your community that do, and this can be a collaborative effort. This isn't an all or nothing. And then a homeless verification letter that someone that is and has ability to write one is certifying that this person is Category 1 homeless. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so this large form, if you would go onto the Secretary of State's website, this would not have all the red writing on it, but we got permission from the Secretary of State to put additional notes on there because at the office and on the website, they do not have all this additional information, but this is the important things to know. We will make sure you get a handout of this. Okay, so if you look at your Social Security number or letter of ineligibility, everyone has to present one of the following documents to prove that they have a valid Social Security number or they are ineligible to have a Social Security number. So for most folks, it's a Social Security card or the printout. It can also be a W-2, a pay stub, and so on. If a document with the full Social Security number is not available, if you look at the red box below, please use a document with the last 4 digits and pursue an exception, which we will go over a little bit later. So if you don't have the full Social Security number for your person and you have a partial, you can have it flagged at the Lansing office ahead of time, the state exception unit. They will look at all the documentation you have and approve it and flag it for the branch office of your choice. And that's how we used to do all of this before the fee waiver mainstream process. So that's important to note. Okay, for legal presence, you have to have at least one of the documents from this column, and that's that passport or certified birth certificate, an enhanced Michigan driver's license or ID card, or a consular report of birth. Those are usually the ones that people have available, and really it comes down to a passport or birth certificate. That requirement is non-negotiable, like we said earlier. If you do not have a birth certificate or a passport, you cannot help your person to apply for an ID. Okay, and then the HMIS card, if you look at the bottom, that states Michigan statewide HMIS on it and a homeless verification form are used for us to do the identity verification and the proof of Michigan residency. So if you look, that is the biggest deal out of all this. If you are homeless, and I'd be preaching to the choir to everyone here, it would be very hard to have a utility bill or a credit card bill or an account statement from a bank with your address or any of those other things. So what this process does, besides provide for a fee waiver, is allows you to declare identity and proof of Michigan residency with one document. It's a form and then the HMIS ID card. So again, we will be giving you this information in a handout, but we just wanted to go over that because if you go to the website for the Secretary of State, these red boxes are not on there. This is for our reference. Okay, let's go to the next form. Okay, so Jason, looking at this, I think I put most of the documents on here into the PowerPoint, so I think that this will help us tremendously. Okay, so this is a proof document. This is for the homeless applicants for the ID and the fee waiver. So this is our homeless verification letter. We're not asking anyone to do creative writing. Sometimes when you go to write something, it actually is not as helpful as having the definition. So what happens is each agency would put this form on their letterhead. We will give you a copy of it. And then you have to put the date, which has to be 30 days within the application, the shelter participant's full legal name. Excuse me. And I will say some of us aren't shelters. If we're working with the shelter and they are a program participant, that's fine as well. The date of birth and their HMIS number. So again, you have to be working with someone that has HMIS. It doesn't have to be that the person filling this out has it, but they have to work with someone that is. And this is pretty self-explanatory. This form, oh, I see typo. It shouldn't say this is form. It should say this form, along with accompanying HMIS card, is being used to verify the above individual household is currently homeless based on the HUD Category 1. We put the Category 1 definition of homelessness so everyone would have the same definition that they were working with. And then we please check the location in which the household currently resides. So you would be picking emergency shelter, place not meant for human habitation, safe haven, other or transitional housing. And then the case manager from the referring agency is attesting that they reviewed the definition by HUD as outlined above, and they're providing the verification as appropriate for that family. And then this verification serves to document that the above homeless applicant is receiving services from, and that's a shelter or organization name. So if I was filling it out, I'd write from Community Housing Network. And per the SOS guidelines, the above named individual is eligible to present this homeless verification as a single proof of residency document. This allows you to make the column 4 work for you, as well as use this to verification to request receiving the ID at the shelter agency address. So then you have the applicant initial that first line, they're applying for the fee waiver, and then where the ID is going to go to. And that's why we put the shelter provider's name, address, and number. Nowhere on here does it say that the person has to be staying at the shelter, just that they're receiving some kind of services. So if your local shelter will allow someone to accept mail, get their mail there, maybe they don't want to stay at the shelter for whatever reason with their disability or whatever their preference is, and they're still working with the shelter, that would work. Another organization would work as well. Case manager signature and date, and then the case manager puts their name and phone and email so that if there's any questions, that they'll have the information and are able to do that. So you fill out this form along with the accompanying HMIS ID card, and this will be in the handouts you receive after today. Okay, next slide.
Sorry, Deb. I'm juggling multiple things. I'm getting contacted because some folks are having issues logging into the webinar today, so I'm trying to address that. But we also had a question come in. So we have a question from a DV provider. They have some folks, well, one person individual who fled to Michigan from another state. Is she eligible for a free ID?
So she's now homeless in the state of Michigan, so her residency would be satisfied with this process. However, she would need to still have a certified birth certificate. And because you're a DV shelter, I know that HMIS is not an option for you guys, but you can work with a partnering agency in your community to make that HMIS card and then lock down the file. And I'm probably not saying it as well as Jill would say it, and she can maybe speak to that more, but it is possible to do this process in those situations.
Okay.
Okay, so we wanted to make sure people understood, again, the definition of Category 1 homelessness. So this is bigger. This explains, and I've explained it already, that it has to be someone that's literally homeless. So in the case of someone that fled DV, if they're literally homeless now, then they qualify for this. For the person in the shelter, the person that's maybe living on the streets, someone living in an abandoned house, that is what this program is for. And it gives you the definition there. We didn't write it, HUD did. We just cut and pasted. Okay, so this is an example. Again, we like to have a little humor in our presentations of what an HMIS card might look like. Jill will talk about this a little bit more. Were we planning I went through the whole presentation, or is Jill going to come in at this point, Jason?
I think I'll come in at the end, Deborah.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Okay, so this is just an example of what it would look like. Let's go to the next one. So that is what you use with the form we just went over. Okay, so what do you need to get a state ID through the fee waiver? You have to have a social security number, present one of those. They must have a complete social security number, or you have to go through the exceptions process. Column 2, legal presence. We said this a couple times and we keep saying it for a reason. It's not negotiable. You have to have a certified birth certificate with a raised seal, not the fancy birth record with the footprint that some of us like for scrapbooking, or a U.S. passport. Again, more information to follow about fee waivers for birth certificates in the future, but locally, I think most of us know how to get them. We're working on trying to get a fee waiver well, we have the fee waiver. It's just that we're going to have a process for how to do that in the state of Michigan. Okay, next, please. Okay, and then we talked about this again. Column 3 that we talked about, this is all about that SOS 428 we talked about. An HMIS service point ID card meets the identity verification requirement, plus one or more additional choices from column 3 on the SOS form. So you need something else, most likely too, with that. And then a proof of Michigan residency is the homeless verification letter that we talked about in this packet, as well as 2 pieces of mail that show that the individual uses this address. So for instance, if a person gets their SSI award letter at the shelter, or some other document, maybe their case manager follows up with them with a letter after a visit, all of those things work. So those are the things we're doing with this process, this exception. Okay, next. Okay, partial Social Security numbers and alternate documents. There are going to be times where you're working with a program participant and they don't have the full Social Security number. In those cases, we can ask for an exception and have it flagged. So let's go ahead and go through some of that right now. Okay, so when do you have to use the exceptions process? If you're not sure the documentation is complete based on the columns we talked about, and you want to make sure before sending it to the client, to the Secretary of State office, because you don't want to have them to go for more visits, that would be the time to use it. If the client does not have official documentation with a full Social Security number on it, or if you want to substitute a document for one listed. So instead of a high school transcript, your person's been out of school for 50 years, you might want to use a vaccination record or a foreign passport. Remember, you can't substitute a document for a birth certificate unless it's a current U.S. passport. So in those other situations, we're not saying it's impossible as long as you have that birth certificate, but you might have to use alternate documents, and that is not a time you want to send your program participant or your client to the local branch office until you've gone through it with the state exception unit. Okay, so for Secretary of State ID exception process, okay, so when the person doesn't have a Social Security card and all the documents that they have do only have one partial number, remember, there's no cost for a Social Security card. This will reduce the number of trips to supply additional documentation for the program participant, but does require some more work on your part as a case manager to facilitate it. And it provides opportunity for discussion and planning with that ID exception unit before the program participant visits the local branch office. So what you're doing is you're submitting all the paperwork and building the file and submitting it to the state ID exception unit in Lansing, and then they look over all the documents, and you're going to say to them, okay, well, I'm going to my program participant, once you give us approval, is going to go to the Oak Park office. And what they'll do is send something ahead of time, say this is potentially qualifies as long as they bring all this document to the Oak Park office, and they'll flag that name. So when John Smith comes to that office, because they've given you the approval to go ahead, it will be a smoother process for John. Individuals must have a document to meet the legal presence requirement, as we talked about, which is the birth certificate. I know we keep saying it, but we say it for a reason because people continue to ask that question. You have to have a birth certificate or a passport in order for this to work, and it has to be certified or raised seal. Okay, so here are our helpful tips, and some of these are from when this was just a pilot program, so this is only when you have to go for the exceptions. Use the forms as templates provided and follow instructions. You'll see in most cases on the forms that we developed, there'll be capitalized areas that you refill in. It's not that we're yelling. We just wanted to make sure that you knew where to put the information in to customize it. And it's really a template. You don't have to do creative writing. Just put what is asked to be put in. In your packet, you're going to get an exception process cover sheet, which explains stuff and frequently asked questions. We have probably heard I don't want to challenge anyone, but close to every question possible about this program, and we took the highlights and put them on. So if you have a question, our chances someone else had that question before. When using the exception for the partial Social Security number, make sure to submit the packet for the Secretary of State's review like we talked about, but make sure you get confirmation back from them before you send John Smith to that local branch office. We don't want to make this difficult. Remember, you're faxing this application to the ID exception unit and waiting for a formal written approval before you go. The document will come back with this phrase, and we thought it was important: individual is not eligible for exception. That's one of those like double negatives. So what it means is that your program participant can go to the branch office, So send your program participant to that local office with that document in hand. That basically says this person's good to go. And less is more does not apply to this program. The more documentation you have, the better. So if I had a program participant that didn't have a full social security number or card, but I had 3 documents with a partial number, I think that supports your case. It says this person really has a social security number. So if you have more than 1 document, send it all. Just fax it all over to the exception unit. Okay, next please. Okay, so we're going to go over the packet right now. Oh, except we aren't really. So we went over the SOS 428 and the other. So the other one I wanted to go through that you need for the exception, can we look at documents 3 and 4, please, Jason? It's required exception number 3.
Sorry, I had you on mute. Yep, I'm in the process of pulling those up right now.
Okay. I could pull it up. I'm going to start with number 3.
Number 3? Okay.
Yeah, request for review of documentation. So the reason we say numbers to everyone is when you get the packet, will all be in numbered order to help you. And they will either say, like the first one says number 1, REF, that means reference. Number 3 is REQ, which means required. And it says it's only for an exception. So we really try to label this easily for you.
Okay. So here we go.
So yeah, here we go. So this is, you'd insert this on your letterhead. And again, this is only when you need an exception, like you have a person that has a partial social security number. So where you see date in parentheses, you'd fill in a date. Where you see anywhere there's a line that says program participant full legal name, put their name in and their date of birth. It's very important that you put their full legal name. Like I'm Deborah Hendren. I wouldn't go by Debbie Hendren on this. I wouldn't anyways, but just in general, you don't want to have a nickname on here. Okay, and then if you look, it says, please refer to the SOS 428 for the specific categories and requirements. So we've numbered, for the most part, everything you need. But the SSN document, you wouldn't have that. For 7, 8, 9, and 10, I'd put examples of what I had with a partial number. So I would say IPOS, Individual Plan of Service, CMH, partial social security number, put the first one. W-2, partial social security. Whatever you have with a partial number, I'd list them all out. And then where you see below, it says program participant name, you'd change that to John Smith. Cannot meet the department's identification requirements for the following reasons. So in this case, John Smith became homeless after being involved in a house fire and lost his documents. John Smith's stuff was stolen. Any of those kinds of things. So that would make it easier for John Smith to explain why he needed it. I wouldn't want to put the same thing for every person because that's probably a little individualized. Okay, John Smith is also considered homeless as verified by the enclosed, and then you would replace this text with a document description. So for us, we have that letter we already went through, the homeless verification form, HMIS card, or shelter letter. So you'd have that because you were still applying for a fee waiver. John Smith would like to apply for identification at the following branch. So you need to tell them what branch you want to go to and the address so they know that John Smith will be showing up in Oak Park, okay? Because they want to alert the office that he's coming. Okay, thank you in advance for your consideration. I'd put my name, Deborah Hendren, Community Housing Network. I'd put my direct number, my fax number, my email. I want to make sure that the exception unit can get a hold of me. While you're going to fax it to them, you want alternate ways that they can communicate with you. Most of the time, they will call you. Okay, so that is the first form. Okay, the second form I wanted to go over, and again, these are only for exceptions, and they're listed as such, is number 4, the required exception authorization for release of information. I think all of us here are pretty familiar with releases of information and how important they are that someone gives you permission. So again, you can put on letterhead, you can put their full legal name, their address, date, zip, and all that. I, John Smith, hereby authorize. So in that agency name, I put Community Housing Network 2, and then we're going to check off the disclose and obtain. There's instructions on all of this. Information pertaining to my housing to the organization person listed below. You do not have to change anything else. Keep going down. Do you agree to this? They just circle. And then you don't have to change anything about the specific information to be disclosed or obtained. They sign it, and you sign it, and we are good to go. So those 2 documents that we just went over, the 3 and the 4, along with the documents that we talked about, getting the Social Security card, all the other pieces of paper, the birth certificate, all of that, you would include in this pack. and you would send it to the state exception office, and then they would approve that with that language that you have to look at specifically, and then you could send them to their local branch office to get their documents. Again, you do not need to do this for a fee waiver. This is because they don't have a full Social Security number on any of their documents, or they have an alternate document that is not listed on the SOS 428. Otherwise, just go straight to the office for the fee waiver to meet the residency requirements with the documents we talked about. Okay,
so
we can go back
a question real quick, a question has come in. Somebody asked whether you could do either the exceptions process or the fee waiver at any of the SOS branch offices, or if it was just particular branch offices that are participating in these programs.
So it's mainstream now. So if all you need is a fee waiver and you're just changing that residency requirement that we talked about first, any branch office, just walk in. Your person should walk in. If they have a problem, because every once in a while, we have to be honest, someone at the Secretary of State office doesn't know, you let us know. We contact Lansing right away, and they usually have them trained within a day, and it's smooth sailing after that. So their first one, if it's in an area that hasn't done it, there is a potential that they might not be as familiar with it as we'd like them to be, because they've had to train a lot of staff. For the exception, you're sending it to Lansing, and you can use any branch office once they flagged it and said it's good to go, but you have to let them know which branch office. So for instance, I live in Royal Oak, which is in Oakland County. So I would most likely, for my clients in Oakland County, use Oak Park or Pontiac, because that's close to a bus line and where they can go. And by now they're really, really familiar with us and the process. But I could use any branch office. If I had a program participant that was closer to Troy and that's where they could walk to, I would then set them up to go to Troy for it. Does that help, Jason?
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Yeah, that's
okay.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So we reviewed the SOS exception and fee waiver packet, the forms that we need to. The only other thing I'd like to add is, and this happens very rarely, sometimes you have a program participant that can't stay with a family member, and by family member we mean a legal familial relationship, not Aunt Sally, who's not really Aunt Sally, but we call them Aunt Sally because they've been good to us all these years. So let's say someone's homeless and their mom says they can't stay here, but I really want their homelessness to be resolved, and I'm allowing them to use my address. We can then establish residency through that familial legal relationship. It's a handwritten form that the program participant and that family member fills out. It comes up very, very rarely. If that does come up, it will be in your packet with instructions. I think that's the only other form we really needed to go over. Okay. Next slide.
Oh, sorry. There we go.
Okay, under development. So we just want to talk about advocacy efforts, and some of this has already been taken care of, so we're going to breeze through this. And Jason, please help me with this part, because sometimes I don't know the numbers of the bills. Okay. The fiscal year 2020 budget includes a $226,000 line to waive birth certificate fees for people experiencing homelessness. This will help individuals obtain critical personal identity documents that are needed as they work towards regaining permanent housing. And that was approved, correct, Jason?
That is correct. That is the program you were referring to earlier. Right. Yeah. so they're not even current advocacy. Right. These are advocacy wins.
These are successful, right.
Right.
So that is a successful advocacy effort. So again, we know we have it. The money was partitioned in two different ways, and we're waiting to get the system in place, but we have been told it will pretty much model what we're doing with the fee waivers for with the HMIS cards and the ID, because it's a good process and it works if we use it. So what it will be is there are folks that have their birth certificates stuck in Lansing, right? Stuck's probably not a good word, but it was a sealed record. It was an adoption, or their parents weren't married and it was before 1978, and it might be at the state level. There's some work on the right-hand side about supporting some changes that the fees will be equivalent. So like in Oakland County, we have a fee waiver for all vital docs for people and trying to get housing. So in that case, you wouldn't pay that Lansing thing. But it also might be that you're in Oakland County and your program participant was born in Macomb. There's going to be a system in place that you could order it for the local clerk first rather than going through the state. and then get reimbursed from MDHHS with a process. We can't tell you exactly what it's going to look like, but we will update the training when those things become available, and MDHHS will probably be involved in that training process. So it's important to know that there's funding coming to help with that. We aren't sure, like the situation that someone just mentioned where the person fled from another state, if there'll be money for that. But our thought is that if we could at least make it that in the state of Michigan, if you were born here and you could get your ID for free, that will eliminate some of the costs and expenses that agencies are running into, that maybe then that other money can be reserved for people that have more unusual situations. Not that they're unusual, but typically a lot of our folks are from the state of Michigan. And then vital records and birth certificates, we're going to continue to expand the network of local county clerks to provide those fee reductions. We're hopeful that the state is providing some leveraging for out of county, that maybe local county clerks will agree to also do fee reductions and waivers. And then the HB 4152 and 4153 would allow the county clerk's office to charge the fee for their birth certificates, regardless of whether it's obtained locally or the MDHHS office, and that will be working in tandem with the $226,000. Did I miss anything, Jason?
No, you hit all of the greatest hits.
Awesome. And I'm not going to even sing to anyone, so that's all good.
Yeah, so we had a couple of questions come in. In particular, we have some youth providers who are on the call today, and
okay, great.
They're wondering about whether or not their clients would be eligible for the fee waiver, because of course the HUD definition for homeless youth is slightly different than for Category 1. So you want to talk a little bit about those differences?
This is really truly, this is truly Category 1. It is not the McKinney-Vento expanded definition. Although sometimes, just like we have people attempting to flee DV and then they become Category 1, right now for the purposes of this, we had to really focus on a specific tangible category for the state to be able to make this work in the Secretary of State. So it is indeed Category 1.
So they did ask an interesting question that I don't know we've fielded before with these trainings. Does a youth who's under 18 need permission from a parent or guardian to obtain their state ID?
So I don't know where the age changes, but I know for sure at 17, and I only know this incidentally or anecdotally, you do not need your parents' permission.
Okay.
And this isn't a driver's license either. So, and you know what, we're really encouraging people like offsite. I'm going to just go on a tangent for a second. State IDs are available for people basically from the minute they're born. The Secretary of State has done a lot of work with like Head Start programs and stuff to get people in the system. And this is just my personal editorial. For a lot of folks, especially living in poverty, it used to be that your driver's license would be your way to start your identification history, and then you'd be in the system and, you would have started that process. So you have an ID. But as the cost of car insurance and buying cars and gas goes up, a lot of kids in poor communities aren't doing that. So we're really, really encouraging all your program participants and all their children to get IDs. It's always a good thing through the school system and other things. So to start that process early, and I know that isn't what the person asked, but I would try to get those things in place for people so they're already in the system and start to have that ability to track that they have that photo ID.
That's a good suggestion. So we had one more question come in that's related to what you presented on, and then we actually are sitting on some questions for, I know what Jill's going to present on around the HMIS ID card. And this person works in the substance abuse field, and she's saying that a lot of times they have clients who come in with no documentation at all. So no ID, no social security number, any of that. Can you get a birth certificate without an ID, or where should these folks be looking to start the process?
So that's $1 million question. It's a little bit different in every community. We have a process in Oakland County with some forms we developed that we work in tandem with our clerk's office, and usually through the interview process, they can usually establish identity. Getting the birth certificate would be the first step, but I agree that can be a cumbersome process. And I think having more of these processes in place at the state level will make it easier. But typically, if you go to your local clerk office, if you have that luxury and talk to them, they will come up with a way to help you to establish who you are. And again, that HMIS card could be very, very helpful in doing that.
Yeah, and that's actually a good segue at this point. So I think that exhausts all the questions that we've got up to now that's related to everything you've covered. Like I said, we're sitting on some questions. I see the questions are related about the HMIS ID process, and we'll ask Jill to address those when she's on board. And I think we're at the point where we're ready to transition to Jill. Jill, are you still with us?
I am.
Okay, can switch the con over to you?
That's great.
Okay, coming your way in 3, 2, 1.
Okay, great. Thank you, Deborah and Jason. My name is Jill Shoemaker, and I'm with the Michigan statewide HMIS team. And I'm going to talk today about creating and generating the HMIS ID card. So as Deborah mentioned earlier, Service Point has the capability of creating a form of identification in what we call an HMIS ID card. It is an acceptable form and of identification for this vital records project. It's a pretty simple process, and I'm gonna walk through it. But what I want to talk about before I actually give the presentation of generating the card, this is the area about the HMIS ID cards that we get a lot of questions on. So I would like to talk about this first. So the way that the Service Point ID card works, and the way that as Deborah mentioned earlier, and actually as part of the presentation material, there is an example of what an HMIS card looks like. And we often get questions about printing those HMIS cards. And, how would you go about taking a photo if you don't have a camera, and those sort of things. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. When you're looking at printing the HMIS card, we do have some recommendations here. This document here is part of the handouts and part of the packet, and it is a step-by-step instructional on actually how to create and generate the HMIS ID card. And so when we're talking about actually uploading a photo, some agencies don't have a camera that they use for for taking photos of folks. You can use an old camera phone, a decommissioned cell phone that you could take pictures of, so that you can save that to your PC and then upload it into the HMIS client profile. There are lots of plug-and-play cameras now that are pretty inexpensive, so that could be an option for you. As far as printing the ID card goes, the goal is to make sure that the card that you actually print out is a form of identification that isn't going to get ripped up immediately. So that would mean that you would like to that you should have some paper stock that is approximately 50 to 75 pounds. The Xerox quality paper might not produce the readable cards that you're looking for. You can use a thick cardstock if your printer allows for that. You can laminate those cards. The local Office Depot or whatever has some of those laminating sheets. If you don't have a laminating machine in your organization, those sheets work well. You can, run the the ID onto the paper stock and then use the laminating sheet to make it as more like a typical, like an ID card, a license or something. If you don't have the option to make that card, laminating it or making it on the thicker cardstock, you could use just plain old Xerox paper, but know that that isn't going to be a form of identification for them, for your folks, that is going to last, more than just taking it to the Secretary of State. So when we're talking about the types of printers to use, a suggestion is that they can print at 600 dpi or greater. The monochrome laser printers are, of course, recommended, but each agency may not have that. Inkjet printers, you want to make sure that they're high quality and that they're capable of printing at the 600 dpi. You always want to run a test printout on your printer of choice in case you need to, adjust the spacing or anything like that. And so those are some recommendations. If you are an agency who is using HMIS and have the capability to do the printing, then these are some suggestions for you. So with this step-by-step instructional, what I'm going to do is to also come right into Service Point here and actually show you how to upload a client picture into the client profile and print out the ID. So the first step, of course, is to actually take the photo. And you would save the client photo to your computer. And we have a naming convention here. And we find that the naming convention for the client photo helps you identify exactly when that photo was taken, including the year, the month, and the day. And this makes it much easier to ensure that you have a recent photo for the ID. And you can see here that we have the naming protocol here. So would be the client photo. 2019, I took this photo on 3/27, and the name of my client is Handbag. And so you can see here that I have first initial and last name, and that just makes it easy for everybody to know that that's a current photo. You will save it as a JPEG file so that you're able to upload it that way. I'm going to come right into Service Point here, and I am in my client profile. And if I come down here to the file attachments, I am going to click Add a new file attachment. It's going to allow me to choose the file. And I am going to come right here, and you can see here I have my JPEG file here. And if I open that, I can put here and if I upload it, I have the uploaded file attachment here. And then there is another way to actually, you can see here that when I upload my file into the file attachments, that's for the attachment itself. I can go ahead here, and I'm going to go through the same process. And when I do that, I now see that my client photo is here, right on my client profile. So this is my client photo. And I have the option right here to generate an individual photo. And if I click on that, I will see my ID card print options box here. And I want to make sure that I choose the Michigan Service Point site. So I'm in the training site here and not our live site. And so I have that marked here. And I can, I want to make sure that I check the image to display. I want to include my client profile and also include the client date of birth. And when I generate the ID card, it's going to look like this. So I have my client photo. We have the name of the software, which is Service Point. And then we have our client name, the client ID and Service Point, and if there was a date of birth, that would be on there. Card as well, that there is a barcode here, and this is used, and it also has our client ID here. Some of our larger shelters who will maybe have a meal program, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, often provide their guests the ID cards that have the scanners, the barcode scanner here, and then as folks come in for breakfast, they'll go ahead and scan the card, and it's an easy way to use Service Point to apply services to a larger group of people. But this is what your ID card is going to look like. Now we also have the option to print multiple ID cards at once. And that is done via ScanPoint. And I do have a step-by-step instructional here on using ScanPoint. And so let's say you had a group of folks coming in through the HARA or your shelter, and you wanted to print multiple cards at a time. You can see here within our ScanPoint tab, or our ScanPoint module, we have 4 tabs across the top. And there's one that says Generate ID Cards. And I can actually generate ID cards, multiple ID cards from a list of our clients that I created. You can see here I have several, two clients here, our Handbag and Bart Simpson. And I am going to want to print ID cards for both of them. And when I do that, you will see here that I now have several cards that I'm printing at the same time. So when we're talking about card stock, typically the card stock is either 8 or 10 ID cards in the stock. And so if you're printing them individually, of course, you'll have to place them appropriately. But if you are going to print like 10 at a time, they'll all be here and you can just go ahead and click print from here. And so it's a pretty simple process. We have step-by-step instructionals, and then if you're an agency using HMIS, you know, you can absolutely send if you have a question, send a ticket to our help desk. If you are an agency who is not using HMIS, you will want to partner with a local agency who is using HMIS. Could be the local HARA or one of your local shelters or another agency that you have a relationship with, and they can go ahead and print these cards for you. So you will be working together on this. And so that's the process. Pretty simple, taking a picture, uploading the picture into the client profile, and printing the ID card from there. So Jason, I've got time for some questions if we have some coming in.
And we do have we have a logistics question, and hopefully you might be able to provide some insights. I know I have some ideas, but so we have somebody from, I believe Teresa's from the UP, and her issue is that their nearest HMIS office is 50 miles away. Any suggestions for how they might be able to coordinate between service provider office and the agency that has the HMIS in terms of sending documents back and forth? Is it possible to the HMIS folks could print out things and then drop them in the mail and send them over to the office? Obviously that slows things down, but is that a viable workaround, or are there other workarounds that you might suggest?
So the nearest HMIS agency is 50 miles. Yeah, that is a barrier. My suggestion, and Jason, you'll have some too, with having that, so that's a lot of miles to traverse, right? So I don't know if you have some sort of a relationship with that agency where your case managers are maybe going, or outreach people might be going, back and forth between that span of miles, that they might be able to deliver something to you. I don't know that I would consider just sending it like snail mail. I think you could probably do it with a FedEx or something like that. But I don't know if if just sending it via mail would be an option. What do you think on that, Jason? What are your ideas on that? I know logistically it's hard when you have that many miles between your agencies.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of leaning that same direction, just in terms of trying to use some type of delivery service, whether that's regular mail or not. And Jill, because these are HMIS ID cards, would there be anything that would prohibit folks from sending them as attachments via email? Like, would the email have to be encrypted because there's identification? Or what's your take on the ability to do that?
That's a really good question. I don't actually think that I would suggest a system of attaching that.
Okay.
It does, especially, it's a lot different if the reason that we actually upload the ID for those that are using HMIS is so that we don't have attachments going through. I think that's a question that I need to ask, to take back to the team. I don't. I will say that I will absolutely bring an answer back, but I think to determine that my thought on that is correct is that I would not consider that an option, but I will ask about it.
Okay, perfect. And Teresa, I think you get a gold star because this is one of the first times I've ever heard Jill stumped by an HMIS related question. So,
I want to say no on it, and I will say no on it, but I also think that it's a legitimate question as far as the reason that it is an issue is because of the rural nature of being up north, being in the UP, and we do know that there's just a wide expanse of miles there. So I definitely think it's something to pursue. So I will absolutely do that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Jill. And it looks like we had some other HMIS related questions come in early on. but you actually covered all of that content with your presentation. So I think we're good for right now. We had two folks make statements, and this was kind of more related to the material that Deb covered. And folks are just reminding everybody that you can request up to 10 Social Security cards in your lifetime, and then even past that, you can still get exemptions. But just reminding folks that there is a limit eventually, but it takes a little while to get there. So and I think that's on the front end as folks are navigating that process of getting together the Social Security card and the birth document. So otherwise, it looks like we don't have anything else in the pipeline. So at this point, just as a reminder to everybody, I will send an email out later this afternoon that will have the full range of all the documents that Deb and Jill covered today, including the PowerPoint. The other thing that I will do is upload the recording from today's training. So if folks have questions or there's a certain part that you want to go back and listen to, or maybe you want to share it with some colleagues so that they can walk through the process themselves, you'll have all of that at your availability between the PowerPoint slides and then the recording of the presentation. So, and right as we near the 1 o'clock hour, I think we'll just wrap up because nobody else has asked any questions. So once again, Deb, Jill, thank you so much for taking time out of your days to do this presentation. And for everybody else, I hope you have a great afternoon, and we'll talk to you later. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good one.
Thank you.